worship team. That's beautiful. Thanks, Caitlin. If you don't know me, I suppose I should introduce myself. My name is Evan. I have the privilege of currently being the pastor of this campus. Before we get into studying about the life of Joseph, that's what we're going to be doing today, I kind of wanted to give you something that came to my mind this morning. Everything that's happening with this building, I feel like, is a symbol for this community, for what the church truly is. Right? The whole purpose that this exists is why? To glorify whom? God. Right? That's why this building exists, is so that way we can come together in order to learn more about him, praise him. Doesn't matter what it looks like, does it? Doesn't matter how much it changes. Right? Were you guys here last week? Remember that wall that used to be there? Right? Every week we come in here, this building is changing. The same is true of our community. Each week, more and more people are coming in, creating what this needs to be. But is this a perfect space? Is this fully beautiful the way that Joanna would create it, right? Joanna Gaines? No, right? Look how messed up this room is. But how beautiful it is at the same time. That's us. That's our community. We're a hodgepodge group of people that God is bringing together to glorify his name. You know, part of me is a little hesitant when we move upstairs to the finished sanctuary. If you guys haven't had a chance to look at it yet, we're definitely moving towards that. But man, I just love this, us embracing just the mess together so that way we can worship God. You know, and one other thing came to my mind. You guys see now so clearly where we're at? We are literally in the heart of the city. Like Paul told me this morning, that is the mission field. What, 2 inches away from this church, 3 inches away from this church is a world in need of him. We are the church, and this is our drive. Something that we've kind of decided to do is only give you one announcement for things that are happening within this church each Sunday morning. You can get the rest of them on the email or on the app. But the one thing I want to tell you about, in about a month, August 25th, we're going to have another joint service up at the main campus, which is so much fun to come together. After that, we're going to have a baptism in Rapid Creek, one of the most beautiful spots to be baptized. If you're a follower of Jesus and you haven't been baptized yet, right, pray through that. Ask God, man, is this something that you are wanting me to do? A tangible profession of my faith that you're wanting me to take. Has nothing to do with your salvation, but it can still be a really powerful thing that God wants you to do. So if you got questions about that, if you want to get signed up for it, come and talk to me. All right, so Josh already led us in prayer, bringing our minds before the one who gave us this book. So I think we're good with that. Let's get into it. And so this morning, we're going to start a little bit differently. Instead of just jumping right into the Bible, I'm going to do a little bit more philosophy and psychology to get your mind thinking about in the ways that mine has been. So the further that I get into my life journey, the more that I'm seeing that we have different stages of life. You know, I came across one author that broke up life into 4 different categories: mimicry, self-discovery, commitment, and legacy. Let me fly us through real quickly the 4 different stages that everyone will experience. So when we're young, much of what we care about is fitting in with those who are around us. So many of the choices that we made are so that way we can mimic or become more like the people that we are surrounded by. And then hopefully if we do that, they'll like us, they'll accept us. If you watch elementary and middle school age kids, you'll see how common this is. But as a person grows up, right, whether they graduate high school or college, right, there's no way to fully pinpoint when this will happen. It seems like we move into a stage of self-discovery, one in which we are looking to figure out exactly who we are and what makes us come alive. During this stage, we are becoming our own. And this often happens through beginning our career, starting a family, building a house, traveling around the world, right? We do it in different ways. After we've got a better understanding of who we are and what we like to do, we then commit to doing whatever we have determined that we should do. We pour in our energy into our careers, right, into our families, and whatever else that we're passionate about. This seems to be the stage that I am currently in. You know, it can start at any point, but for me, it seemed like it began in my mid-30s. I see myself and my contemporaries being quite established in our lives and having a lot of stability in our careers, in our families, right, in the hobbies that we like to do. You know, we know what we like to do, and we have the ability to do it. But in this stage, what I'm starting to recognize is that a person also starts to realize that they won't be around forever. Instead of being able to live in that bubble of self-discovery where we very rarely look at our own mortality, in this stage, we've begun to realize that someday our time on earth will be over. In the fourth stage, right, what the author labeled as legacy, this is when a person knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that they will not live forever. And out of that understanding, they're concerned about what they will be remembered for, by what they will leave behind. Now, during this stage, people tend to use their money and their times to pour into things that they see as worthwhile, right? They give generously to a cause. They also want to speak wisdom into the future generations. It can be done with the younger kids, grandkids, right? Maybe you want to run for president, right? There's all sorts of ways that people are trying to leave that legacy. Now, there are a lot of different ways to describe and define the stages of life, and because of how fluid our personalities and our minds are, it's impossible to perfectly categorize a person into a single stage. But I think it's safe to say that there are stages in life, and that means that each of us are currently growing through and in some form of stage. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, all right, where am I going? I thought I was in a church, not in a high school psychology class. Right? Let me explain to you how this has been connecting me to God's word, right, and what we've been looking at. Over the past couple months, we've been looking at the patriarchs of the Bible, specifically Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and last week we looked at Judah and his story. And as we do that, we've been examining the choices that they made to elevate God in their own lives. This week, like I mentioned, we're going to be looking at Joseph. As I will always tell you, the Bible is a historical document, just like any other text that we read in order to learn about the people that lived before us. Right? This means that these men, the patriarchs, they were real. Right? Even though they lived 3,500 years before us, halfway around the world in a different culture, they were people, which means that they could have been a lot like you and me. This means that from what we see recorded in the Bible, we have the ability to learn from their struggles and their victories. Now, for the most part, everything that we've been learning from Jacob and Judah is that God is faithful to his promise to redeem the world, even though his people are seriously messed up. Last week, Chris did a really good job showing us the way that God is still sees us with love, even when we're in the lowest spots in our lives. Now, as we move into Joseph, we now get to examine the other side of the coin. Instead of watching God's people make one stupid choice after another and see God respond with mercy and grace, we are going to get to observe a man that lives the way that everyone should. He is continually trusting God regardless of what he goes through. He is continually treating people with love regardless of what they deserve. Because of the choices that Joseph made through his entire life, he created a legacy. For us, those of us that can read through his life after the fact, he is known as a man who endured so much undeserved suffering, and he did so with patience, with kindness, and with mercy. And then he was used by God in order to save his family and really the people of God as a whole. And this is an incredible legacy that he left. This is why I started by telling you about the stages of life. It seems like for most people, we don't think about what type of legacy we want to leave until we get near the end of our life. But as we'll see in Joseph's story, our legacy is comprised of the choices we make each and every day, regardless of what stage you are currently in. Our lives are the summation of all of the days we live and each of the choices we make. Because of that, what Chris and I are hoping to show you over the next month are lessons that we can learn from Joseph, a man who left an incredible legacy. Lessons that we can learn because of the choices that he made in every stage of his life. Lessons that we can apply now to the choices that we need to make in whatever is in front of us today. Out of those choices, right, those everyday choices, this is how we will build our own legacy. This morning, we're going to see the proper perspective that Joseph seemed to learn when he was 17 years old, after his brothers sold him into slavery. Through that experience, I believe Joseph learned a new way of seeing life that helped empower him to make the choices that he made, that helped him create the legacy that he did. Now, I want to start by first figuring out a little bit more of who Joseph was. So if you got a Bible, you can start flipping to Genesis 37. That's really where we're going to be hanging out most of the time. As I will always tell you, the Bible in your hands is 100 times better than the Bible that'll be on the screen, right? It's one that you can take with you, one that you can get used to, but if you need the one behind me, it's always there as well. So before we get into Genesis 37, we do learn from Genesis 30:22 that Joseph is Jacob's 11th son, the first one born to his favorite wife, Rachel. Now in chapter 37, we see the logical cause and effect that rolled out of him being the firstborn of the favorite. So Genesis 37, verses 2 through 4. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel, also Jacob, loved Joseph more than any other of his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Was anybody else in here the favorite child as well? There's no way I'm the only one in this community. Do I see any hands? No? All right. Well, in Joseph's culture, I saw one, right? We got to embrace it. It's the most beautiful thing. I'm glad at least one person's willing to admit it. In Joseph's culture, this was potentially a bigger deal than in ours, right? Because the patriarch, that's the oldest man, he had all the power. When he picked one of his kids as the favorite, other people would have seen him as having more power and more privilege. Now, obviously, Joseph's brothers, right, Jacob's other kids, weren't a fan of this. In the verses that follow, we see gasoline poured onto the fire of favoritism. Verse 5. Once Joseph had a dream, and when he had told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream that I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright. Then your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more because of his dreams and his words. He had another dream, and he told it to his brothers, saying, "Look, I have had another dream. The sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What kind of dream is this that you have had? Shall we all come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow to the ground before you?" So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in his mind. Now, we don't know how and why Joseph told his family about these dreams. Right? He may have done it in a prideful way because he wanted to show how cool he was, or he may have done it in a gentle and humble way because he simply wanted to let them know what he had seen. Regardless of the manner of explanation and the motivation behind it, we do know that it created very real issues between Joseph and his brothers. I also think that it's safe to say that Joseph, right, he's being 17 or 18, he was starting to enter into and operate out of the stage of self-discovery, which means that he still very much is trying to figure out who he was. Because of the ways in which his father had been treating him and the dreams that God had given him, there's a good chance that he was overly confident in himself and his abilities. Now, this is all of the context of what lies ahead for Joseph. He is on top of his own world, most likely sure of himself and excited for who he will become. But as most of us know, he is only moments away from his entire world crashing down all around him. We see this starting in verse 12. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And Joseph answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. Skip to verse 17. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. Verse 18. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered Joseph out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. throw him into the pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he may rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in this. In order to learn lessons from this real man, take a moment to imagine what this happening to you. You were sent by your father to check in on your brothers, which we would all assume is just a normal day. You don't do anything that anyone would consider wrong. You are simply being yourself, doing what you are asked to do, and then you are attacked by your family? You are stripped down to your underwear or maybe are bare naked and then thrown into a pit? And as he sat in the pit, I'd imagine he was able to overhear his brothers talking about how they should kill him. At this point, imagine how you would be feeling. Angry for sure. Confused, right? Probably terrified. All of Joseph's brothers are grown men that lived in a time when tribal warfare was a common thing. From what we see back in Genesis 34, when two of them, Simeon and Levi, slaughtered an entire city to revenge their sister being raped, Joseph's brothers are capable and willing to kill. So when Joseph hears them scheming about ending his life, he knows that what they're saying most likely will happen. What a horrible spot that Joseph is in. He is in a literal pit of despair. Now I'm curious to try to start to apply this to us. Have you guys ever been in a situation like this? Right? Life or death? A time when you don't know if you will continue to live. It was maybe you or your family, some good friends. Right, now, because we live in a culture that is far safer than Joseph's, I know that we don't have to worry about being murdered, which is amazing. But what about cancer? What about a really serious accident? Right, a time when you were living your life as all was normal, and then suddenly you came face to face with your own mortality. Now, a lot of you know me, but a lot of you don't. And so I see the value in sharing one of my stories, one that I very rarely share. But I want to show you my ability and my family's ability to relate with Joseph and the situation that he was in. When I was 17 years old, my two brothers, I'm just kidding, we can't relate quite that much. I had you going, I know. They're godly men, they love everyone in their lives. But in all seriousness, here we go. So 8 years ago, I was out rock climbing, and I was being lowered from the top of a cliff. About 30 to 40 feet from the ground, my rope ran out of my belayer's device, causing me to free fall to the ground. As I was bouncing down the cliff, my head bashed against the rock, causing my brain to ricochet inside my skull, which is something that you never want to have happen. As I was lying in a bed in an intensive care unit in a drug-induced coma, the medical professionals were unsure of what would happen to me. It seemed most likely that I would survive, but in what state? A vegetable? Paralyzed? Right? At very best, most likely a man with a very serious traumatic brain injury that would need a lot of help living a normal life. Just like with Joseph, my family was in a place where they could not deny the fact that Evan would not live forever, that I was temporary, fallible, and there was a 100% chance that I would someday die. This is a moment that most people don't experience until they're much, much older. Because of that, because life continues to go the way that we hope, we all stay in the mindset of our younger stages of life until we grow old. Then, because of time, as the natural end of life gets closer, we are forced to admit our frailty. When we're able to hang on to the illusion that we are immortal, it can cause us to get too far wrapped up in things that really don't matter, which then causes us to make choices that we wish we wouldn't have made. But when you are brought face to face with the fact that you will someday die, it can transport you to a place where you begin to see things through a different perspective. And therefore, you begin to make different choices. Now, I'd imagine there's some people in here that have had this life or death experience. And as I'm stating this, you're probably quietly shaking your heads in agreement. But what amplifies this lesson even more so for people like me and Joseph is that even though we should have died, we didn't. Even though I should be drinking out of a straw and having a caretaker wipe the drool off my face, I'm not. For those of us that were given a second chance, the ability to continue to live even though we should have died, for us, we have been given an amazing gift. Even though whatever we went through was really hard, we now have a different perspective, a more proper lens through which to see each day as a gift from our Creator. Now, let me show you where I'm getting this from with Joseph. Right? It's all based on my own experience, but I believe that Joseph had the same opportunity, a chance to have his eyes opened. Right? Even though he's only 17 or 18, he was now able to see life correctly. So where I'm getting this from, right after Joseph had been beaten up and thrown into a pit, Judah convinces his brothers that instead of killing him, why not make a little money by selling him to a caravan of slave traders that just happened to be coming their way at the perfect time? We see this, chapter 37, verses 25. Then they sat down to eat, his brothers, and looking up they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Now, every other time that I've read this, it's just one more terrible thing that happened to Joseph, which it really was. But this time around, I've begun to see it differently. Even though he was sold as a slave by his own family, right, that had to have been a horrible experience, it was still better than him being killed by his family, wasn't it? Right? Even though he was no longer a free man, he still had breath in his lungs and blood pumping through his veins because of God, in his providence, had provided the slave traders to come his way. Now, it doesn't clearly state this, but based on my own personal experience, I believe that Joseph's view on his life had to have changed while he was being carried away on that camel train. He had to have recognized, instead of me being face down in a pit, God kept me alive, which means that he still has purposes to accomplish. What has helped confirm this for me was the way that Joseph's life continued to roll out. In the next chapter, specifically chapter 39, we skip over 38, we see how Joseph, even though he was a slave, he chose to keep living. Genesis 39, starting at the beginning of the chapter. Now Joseph was taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, the officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. He was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. He made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. Now, I know that it clearly states that the Lord was with him, which is something that we cannot overlook. That is the key piece why anything goes well for him. But for a person to be used by God in the ways that Joseph was, Joseph also had to have a good attitude. For him to be put in charge of his master's house, he had to be a hard worker. He had to have ambition and drive. I'd imagine he also had to have a joyful spirit, right? People had to have wanted to be around him. Now, is this how most of us would have felt and act after we had been pulled violently from our wonderful life and sold into slavery by our brothers? No, I imagine that despair would claim the day for the common person, which would negatively affect our attitude and inhibit a person's daily choices. Now, if you agree with that logic, this means that something else had to be fueling Joseph's resilience and hope for the future. And for me, I believe it may have been that he now had the proper perspective on his life. Because of everything that he had been through, being thrown into that pit and then saved, I believe Joseph was now thinking, because I am alive today, this means God has a plan for me. Even though things aren't the way that I want them to be, because I am alive today, I have God-given purpose. Now, I'm sure that the dreams that God had given him earlier were also helpful with Joseph maintaining this perspective. I can imagine him telling himself, God, you kept me alive, and I know you have plans for me. Therefore, I will live with everything that I got. I will continue to embrace the day and have gratitude for this moment. Without you, God, I would not be here. But because of you, God, I have everything I need. The more that I consider Joseph and his recorded stories and the legacy that he left, I am believing that this new perspective was a foundation off of which he built his life. By understanding that every day is a gift given to him by God, he was able to properly handle everything that came his way. Now you may be wondering, where am I getting all this from? The idea of what Joseph was thinking. Don't worry, I got the same Bible that you got, right? So much of this is coming from my own interpretation, right? Which is coming from my own experience. Right? When I went through that near life experience, you guys ever heard it phrased that way? Right? When I should have died, my life and my perspective was radically changed. Now, obviously, things didn't roll out for me the way that the neurologist had predicted. The last time that they took me off that drug-induced coma in order to see how I would react, the neurologist told my family, this is a miracle. Now, the past 8 years have been anything but easy for me. My brain, it was seriously damaged, and it took years and years of hard living for it to slowly regenerate and for me to be back in this state that I'm currently in right now. But because of the new perspective that I was given, I am grateful that I fell. And if I had the power to stop that from happening, I wouldn't do it. Because of what it gave me in shifting my perspective to what is true. Because I should have died. At very best, because I should only be a fraction of the man that I used to be, it opened my eyes to the fact that each and every day that I am alive, it is a gift. Every morning that I'm able to open my eyes and roll out of bed, it is because God wants me to be alive. Over and over, the Bible speaks the same truth for all of us. Check out Revelation 4. This is when everything is falling at the feet of God. Verse 11, they say to him, "You are worthy, O Lord and God, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power." Why? For you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. Out of this perspective that life is a gift can come so many good things to a person's life. One of which is gratitude. Recognizing and admitting that you did nothing to bring about today allows a person to be overwhelmed by the ways that their Creator continues to provide for them so much day after day after day. Right? This perspective also allows us to believe that there must be purpose for today. Because God intentionally gave you this moment, there must be things that He wants to accomplish in you and through you. Because of our God's power, nothing is done by accident or because of happen chance. This means that every one of us exists in this time and place for specific God-given reasons. We see this clearly stated in Acts 17. Paul's talking to some men in Athens. Verse 28, he says, "For in Him," God, "for in Him we live and move and have our being." Man, I got to read that again. "For in Him we live and move and have our being." How powerful is that? When we bring our minds back to these truths, to this way of seeing our reality, it also allows us, in the same way that it did Joseph, to continue to push through the hard times, which of course they will come. And we can do this because we know that we are not alone in this, and there has to be purposes behind what we are going through. This perspective